The giant blankets of smoke created by fuel reduction burns are not popular, particularly with asthmatics, but Tasmanians should prepare for more. As the landscape gets drier, authorities say an increase in prescribed burns is needed to help reduce the risk of catastrophic bushfires. Lucy Shannon reports.
Scientist David Bowman has been fascinated with the workings of fire ever since he was a teenager. He's now internationally renowned on the subject. Walking around a typical Hobart hill, he sees fuel all around him.
The real problem, of course, is that these fuel beds can get fires going into the really serious stuff, like the forests up on the mountain, which, are obviously, then you get real gigantic forest fires. These things are still controllable, and that's why they're useful for fuel reduction burning.
Fuel reduction burning is now accepted as an essential part of preparing for the bushfire season. But David Bowman warns it is not a magic solution.
Fuel reduction burning will provide fire managers with defendable spaces in the landscape, opportunities to try to head off at the pass that plausible catastrophe. But it cannot, if that catastrophe unfolds, stop it.
Such a catastrophe did unfold in Victoria last summer. Tasmanian authorities are all too aware that a similar event could happen here, particularly in the south.
I am concerned that we are carrying a lot of fuel in the landscape, and I'm concerned that there seems to be a degree of apathy amongst the people, the citizenry, who don't realise that if this drying trend continues, that we're looking at quite a serious summer.
The Victorian Royal Commission's final report on the events of Black Saturday concluded that fuel reduction burning was the most effective mechanism for managing fuel. In response, the Victorian government has decided to undertake a bold experiment. They will ramp up their program to burning 5% of all public land. Should Tasmania be adopting a similar approach?
I think we've got to be careful about the 5% scenario going ahead, because do we burn 5% of the state that's easy to burn, or do we burn areas of the state in a fuel reduction sense that are going to have more strategic importance in terms of fire protection?
While he wants to avoid setting a target, the Chief of Tasmania's Fire Service, Mike Brown, concedes not enough fuel reduction burning is going on.
The effect of fuel reduction burning may only be particularly evident for 2 or 3 years. It is the fact that we've got to go and follow up on such areas again and again and again that requires a lot of resources.
Tell us some of the priority areas for fuel reduction burns this season for Forestry Tasmania.
I've got one area up here around Lake Leak. There's another area we're hoping to get into down in the Army Range at the top end of Little Swanport. There's an area here south of Port Sorell, down between Port Sorell and Deloraine. We've also got areas in cooperation with the Parks and Wildlife Service on the west coast, and of course some smaller burns in the Huon.
Few people know fuel reduction burning as well as Forestry Tasmania's Tony Blanks. He believes it needs to be pushed back up the list of priorities.
Forestry's senior management is already seeking ways to increase the area that we burn. Whether we could achieve an area target of 5%, I don't know at this stage.
Forestry Tasmania is planning up to 40 burns in state forest, while the Parks and Wildlife Service has about 100 on its books. 2 weeks ago, taking advantage of good weather conditions, Forestry Tasmania got started, burning 280 hectares of button grass near Geeveston.
It's 8 or 9 years since it had previously been burnt, so that not only was it biologically, ecologically acceptable to burn it, but it had got to the point where if we had a fire there, we probably wouldn't have been able to tackle it effectively. Now we can.
The burns aren't always well received. There were complaints about a lack of notification in Geeveston.
A whole township was inundated with smoke, and the community actually only had several hours worth of notice to actually, amend their travel plans, to take into account the health impacts for the community and so forth.
Tony Blanks believes the approach to targeted burning has improved dramatically in the 30 years he's worked in the area. He says it's now better planned and takes air pollution and threatened species into account.
We've just recently had to postpone a burn that we had planned because it's devil breeding time.
Fuel reduction burning is not an exact science, and there are going to be unwanted side effects.
So it means that even though we generate smoke, we can't absolutely guarantee that there'll be a direct benefit as a result of it. But the one thing that people living in the bush can be sure of is that there will be smoke in the environment. If it's not from fuel reduction burning, then it'll be from wildfires in the summer. Far more destructive, far more expensive to deal with.
As fire seasons get harsher, drought conditions intensify and populations increase, an expansion of fuel reduction burning is inevitable. So getting a social licence for it is a priority. For conservationists, it's a difficult issue. Burning undoubtedly affects biodiversity.
Clearly around built-up areas, the priority is to protect property and life. But in more remote areas, science must underpin the burning regime, and it must be underpinned by ecological principles.
The Hobart City Council's Steve Bresnahan is responsible for fuel reduction burns in reserves around the capital city.
We have a very large and diffuse urban fringe, which makes management of it a difficult thing, and so the resources that Hobart Council puts towards it reflects that. We have our own dedicated crew of staff that conduct the burns. We have significant resources put towards fire breaks, towards the management of the fire trails.
As well as managing its reserves, the council also compulsorily clears bushfire hazards on private property. Mr Bresnahan estimates up to 200 such abatement notices are issued in the municipality every year.
Things that can potentially result in a house being lost in a wildfire could be things like a grevillea hedge underneath a window rather than a unburned bush 50 metres away.
Tasmanian authorities are currently meeting to determine how they will respond to the Royal Commission's final report. The state government says it's reviewing the 67 recommendations. All are keen to ensure the seriousness of the issue isn't forgotten.
I suspect that a lot of people don't actually understand the real story of how the Tasmanian forest ecology works, that lurking in the back of these beautiful landscapes are these horrendous fiery monsters that just can come from nowhere and obliterate whole landscapes.